guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. It certainly has been a while since I've been able to say that. It has been over 2 weeks since I last filmed a video because, as you guys probably know, my boyfriend was in India. I lent him my camera. I couldn't film since then. And he got back yesterday, so reunited and it feels so good. And you can decide if I'm singing about my boyfriend or my camera, or both. The 14th of December, and I really need to sit down and film this video because it's my wrap-up. I had meant to film and upload it before he left, but I couldn't get around to it because I was also sick. Basically everything just kind of went awry and not according to plan at all, and so now I have to do it now, which means it has in some cases been over 1.5 months since I've read these books, so I don't know how much I'll be able to tell you about them at this point. But I'll try my best because November was actually a huge reading month for me. Altogether, I finished, let me see, 13 books, and some of them were pretty big, so let's just jump into it before this video gets any longer. Okay, so as you guys might know, I participated in 3 separate readathons in the month of November. The very first was the Nonfiction November readathon, and I didn't do as well as I had hoped I would. Anyway, so the first nonfiction book I finished in November was One Child by Mei Fong. I hope this doesn't like reflect too badly on you because this is a library copy. Well, it's my book, but it used to be a library copy. This is the story of China's most radical experiment. It is a non-fiction book about the one-child policy in China, and it was absolutely stunning. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much. This book was written by a woman that has is Chinese. I think she maybe grew up in China, then like moved abroad, and now she lives back in China, something like that. But she's a journalist, and she went around China and did interviews with people affected by the one-child policy, which is pretty much everyone anyway, but like she interviewed people on their experiences with it. And her overarching goal with this book was just to find out in what ways the one-child policy has affected the Chinese people, and there are a lot of ways, let me tell you. The chapters are basically dedicated each to like a different, mostly negative outcome, like how it has affected you know, the like the situation of workers in China, how there's like not enough workers now, like not enough people to take care of their old. It's an aging country now, an aging society, and other ways how it has affected the people themselves that have to grow up not having any siblings, and basically being the only one that their parents can rely on when they're older, and also that have to struggle with the burden of like all of their parents' expectations. At the same time, the one-child policy in China wasn't just like a thing like, oh, you just don't have any more children. It was literally people were either having to pay a huge fine for having 2 children, or for like having more than one, like for each child beyond 1 that have to pay, which was too expensive for most people, so they'd be forced to have abortions, sometimes as late as 9 months into the pregnancy. Like the stuff that happened under the flag of the one-child policy is horrendous, and I had not known like 90% of it, so this was fascinating. It was also really interesting because the author herself struggles with infertility throughout her like research time in China, like throughout her time researching this book, and so she also talks about that a little bit, how it like affects her personally. And I think that those 2 things together make for such an impactful story and for such an impactful piece of writing. Like, I honestly cannot recommend this book more highly. And the second and last book that I read for Nonfiction November was Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, Bitcoin, Blockchain, Ethereum, and Smart Contracts by David Sherrard. This is a book about the blockchain technology, but it puts it in a very negative light. After reading this book, I did a little bit of a research on the author, and he's what's it called? Like Realistic Wiki or something, like the Wikipedia page that's like very conspiracy theory-y. He's definitely a big skeptic, and he does make some good points, but he also, I think he looks at things a little bit too narrow-minded. I won't go into detail about this book because A, I don't think you'd care, and B, I will do a full review on it and my thoughts on it on my Crypto Corner channel, which I will link if you haven't checked it out yet. It's just a channel where we talk about cryptocurrencies, so I think that would, you know, make for a better video over there. The next readathon I participated in was Tome Topple, and for Tome Topple, Tome Topple ran for the last 2 weeks of November, and for that I also only managed to read 2 books. One doesn't even fully count, so I guess like 1 book, but I don't know. The first book I finished anyway, it was A Night Film by Marisha Peso. Again, another 5-star book. Oh, I think I gave this book 3 stars, by the way. 5 stars. It was so fucking amazing. If you have not read Night Film, I highly, highly recommend it. It just fucked with me so bad. Like it messes with your head so badly. This book follows a journalist, and he looks into the suicide of a young woman who was the daughter of what's his name? See, I'm already forgetting stuff. Cordova, who is this really elusive, mysterious, very famous movie director, horror movie director, and no one has really seen him. There's no pictures of him. He doesn't show up on any videos, like nothing. So he's a very elusive person. The journalist had looked into him as a person before and been blocked off from basically doing further research, and now that the daughter of this director has committed suicide, this like sparks more interest for him to look into it again and really figure out what happened to the girl. And along the way of doing this research, shit gets real. I don't want to say too much because I really think that you should have to experience this for yourself. Like, it's just towards the end especially, it's just like, oh my god, what is even real? I don't even know what's happening anymore. Oh, this book was so fantastic. It also comes with a lot of, because it is sort of like a research thing, it comes also with like websites that sometimes show up, and pictures and articles and other types of things. What I will say though is that I don't recommend you get this particular edition if you do choose to buy it, because this is like the stiffest book that I have ever read in my life, and it was actual fucking hard work trying to pry the pages far enough open to actually be able to read it. I don't know who came up with the idea of like making this book in such a way. It is really, really hard to read it. Like, you need to actually use like physical strength, and that's the only bad thing that I would have to say about this book, let's be honest. And then the second tome that I read, it doesn't fully count because it's like 470 pages instead of 500, but like, I don't care, do you? And that was Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien. This book is historical fiction set in China during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And also in Canada during the 90s and like early 2000s-ish. So it like kind of goes from there and like moves into the present and stuff. But the book follows 2 separate perspectives. The first we're introduced to is actually the one in the 90s in Canada, where we follow this little girl called Marie, and she and her mother are Chinese, and they have, I think her parents have moved to Canada like several years before she was born. Her parents are divorced, and also her father has very recently committed suicide. And one day her mother gets this phone call from China, and it's this woman asking her if she could send their daughter to her to live with her. And the girl is called Ai Ming, and she moves in with them. She is about 19 years old, I think, and she's fleeing the backlash from the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. And when she comes to live with them, she kind of brings with her some stories, and she tells them to Marie, and they kind of talk about how the 2 families are connected, and like, yeah, what led, like everything basically. From there we go like way back to the beginning of their stories of both of their families. And so basically their ancestors are the people that we follow in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. And during like the Cultural Revolution and all of that under Mao, like all those things. And what I will say is, first of all, overall I really enjoyed this book because I have been hearing a lot of facts about this time in China, and I think it's really important to be able to put these facts into context, because on the page they're like, oh, like numbers, like this and this many people died, and like this is what happened to people, like it doesn't really have an effect on you. But when you read about actual stories, and well, this is not non-fiction, it definitely reads a little bit like non-fiction because of the way it's written. I think it really helps you to understand like historical facts in the way that they like actually like affected people. The book definitely makes a point and try to stick as close to like actual historical facts as possible. There's even at the end of it, there's like page numbers and like footnotes basically. They're not within the book because I think they would kind of clutter up the pages, but at the end you can go back and be like, oh, like there's like little explanations to things and like, oh, this really happened, which I think is really, really nice. The book plays a lot with themes such as music and literature and like really uses them to describe the characters during the setting in China and like what those things meant to them, what it meant to have them taken away from them during things like the Cultural Revolution, which I really appreciated. But at the same time, that was kind of happening a little too much, like especially the music aspect. I was like, can we please stop talking about the particular piece of classical music because I just don't really care that much about it. Overall, I rated this book 3 stars, I think. The reason why is because while I did enjoy it, it was a little bit cluttered in terms of characters, especially during the China setting. Like you're just kind of thrown in there and you know that these people are supposed to be like the ancestors of like Ai Ming and Marie, but you don't know who, you don't know exactly what position they're in, like are they like grandparents and like great-grandparents. Like, you're just kind of really confused for the longest time, and it's really difficult to get yourself to care about people when you don't know how to relate to what has been introduced as like the protagonists. I think overall it was a really well-written book. It's definitely very atmospheric and it's very heart-wrenching at times, but I did end up enjoying it with a grain of salt, basically. Okay, and the final readathon that I participated in was the Emoji-a-thon readathon that has like a million challenges. So I'm just gonna quickly tell you the ones that I did have read books for. The Emoji-a-thon was the last week in November, by the way, and you were supposed to read a book set during winter, which I didn't, with a book with angels in it, which I also didn't. To read 60 minutes without looking at your phone, I definitely did that. So that's one challenge down. A book with a reflective cover. I did read Do Not Say If Nothing during that week, at least partially, so I'm counting that. And then a book that you were gifted. And for this, I read 6 stories by Matt. 6 stories. This is 6 stories with Matt Wieselowski. In this case, it actually kind of makes sense. By Matt Wieselowski. And this book is a thriller written in the style of a podcast, very much modeled after Serial, and basically it is someone interviewing 6 different people that were involved in like a murder case like 20 years ago. Sort of like a youth group that were under the guidance of 2 parents. There was like 5 kids, I think, and 2 parents, and they went to a cabin in the woods, a place that they had been before several times, and that one night when the boys disappeared and was not found again, and then a year later his body was discovered, and basically the moderator of the podcast interviews the people that went with him on that trip. And then we also follow little bits and pieces between the like episodes of the podcast. We follow the person who discovered the body a year later, who's the new owner of the cabin. Overall, this book was really freaking disappointing, I'm sorry to say. I was really ready to love it because I really enjoy Serial, but this just felt like a bad version of Serial. Like, I feel like what makes Serial so great is how real it is and how there's no like neat tie at the end of like, oh, this like nothing like wraps up 100%, because in real life that doesn't really happen, and that's sort of what gives it its special something to me, whereas this book just felt kind of contrived and sort of boring at times. There was a plot twist at the end that I was like, oh, I did not see that coming, so that was good, but like after that again it was like, and now we're here, so now this is happening, great. Yeah, I just, this is just kind of a hype book. I think the only thing really special about it is the format and the way that it's like structured in this like podcast style thing, which does make it unique, but apart from that, nothing too special about this book, and I think I gave it like 2 stars. The next challenge was to read a book with red and white on the cover, which again was Do Not Say We Have Nothing. I did not start a new series. Next is a book that's been haunting your TBR, and for this I listened to Yes Please by Amy Poehler, an audiobook. This has been on my project TBR for this year, and I was supposed to read it like way ago. And I do have the physical book, and I read like half of it a few years ago. and then just got sidetracked and lost interest. And I thought I'd listen to an audiobook because I'd heard so many people say that the audiobook version is really great because there's guest stars, there's like just like people that like have written their own essays to put in Yes Please. They are reading their own essays, and I thought that was really cool, and it was really definitely did add a nice little something to the whole experience. I rated this book 3 stars. I thought it was quite fun. I really like Amy Poehler as a person, as an actress, and I really like her humor as well. So it was just really, really interesting and fun, and yeah, it's light-hearted but fun. Then we have a warm and fuzzy read. Again, I don't read warm and fuzzy books, so no. A new book. Again, I'm counting 6 stories. A book featuring sports I didn't read. I also didn't read a book with snow on the cover. A book featuring family or food. Again, do not say we have nothing. These 2 are like all of my challenges. A book with bad reviews I didn't read. A book featuring travel. This one. A book with a summer setting, and an audiobook. Again, I did listen to Yes Please. Alright, so that is all of the readathons out of the way. I still have 2, 4, 6, 7 books to talk about. Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. So these are all books that have nothing to do with any of the readathons that I just wanted to read. Alright, so I just talked for a very extended period of time about the book that I read, These Violent Delights by Victoria Namkung. Sorry, I keep forgetting her surname. It's an arc, and I ranted about it a little bit, and I think that I'm gonna cut that out and put in, like, make a separate video for it, because this video is gonna be already way too long. Okay, so from now on we're gonna go more or less in chronological order. So the first book I finished actually in November was House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. Oh, I finally finished it. Can you believe it? I barely can. This book was also my project TBR for 2017, and I had read about half of it like 2 years ago, and I didn't reread those because it would have killed my motivation completely. So I just kept going, which, you know, was a little bit of an issue because then I was like, what is even happening right now? I did vaguely remember what had happened previously, and I like flipped back a few pages and like reread that chapter. But, you know, I mean, some subtleties probably went by me just because there has been so much time between the first and second half of it. If you didn't know, House of Leaves is like a very experimental work of fiction, I would say. Basically, there's so many layers to it. There's like a documentary on a weird house that like changes, the inside changes dimensions, so there's like suddenly way more space, like new corridors and new rooms, and the family lives in there and they like have to deal with the changes to the house. And then so basically that's the core story, and someone filmed a documentary on that and transcribed it, and then someone else put notes in the margin of that transcription, and then someone else again finds that and writes his own notes. So I think, is that one layer too many now? I'm so confused. But there's a lot of layers, and it's something. It's something. I ended up giving this book, I think, 3 stars because, or 2 stars, 2 or 3 stars. I just like, I don't know. I feel like you're either gonna love or you're gonna hate this book, and it just went way over my head. I think it felt like it was trying to be so clever all the time and like so special, like, oh, this is like, no one has ever done this before. I'm gonna be extra confusing, and like, I mean, people have devoted like so much time working their way through this and like analyzing every little thing about it, and like, oh, it's too pretentious for me. It is straight up too pretentious, and I mean, it's not even trying to hide the fact that it is pretentious, and I just couldn't, like, meh. It also wasn't as spooky as I thought it could have been. It just like, I didn't feel much when reading it, and so I was a little bit disappointed. Then I read a 5-star book, and there have been a lot this month, yes. That was the first book of the His Dark Materials trilogy, Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. It was a reread. I hadn't read it since I was a child, and so I was a little bit apprehensive because I was like, what if I hate it? It's middle grade, so like, what if I'm just bored? I was not freaking bored at all. This book was so magnificent. It is so well written. It is so magical, and just, it does, I loved it so much. Then I read a book that I've already done a review on, so I will link that in the cards, and that is Authority by Jeff Vandermeer. This was what I ended up picking from the Try a Chapter tag that I did back in November, and then I read this like in a day or 2. It's the second book in the Southern Reach trilogy, and again, you can watch my review up in the cards. The next book was The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. This is another thriller, and it follows this man and woman that meet at the airport and randomly start talking, and then the man like jokingly says like, oh, I want to kill my wife, and the woman says like, oh, I'm gonna help you. And then they do exactly that. They plot his wife's murder. It has been a while since I've read this book, but still it is such a forgettable book. I'm really sorry. I know a lot of people really like this. I just barely remember the ending. I feel like the first plot twist was the best and the one I didn't see coming at all. And then from there it just kind of went downhill, and it just kind of like went all over the place. I didn't really feel like I cared too much anymore. I was just like, whatever, like, can we just get to the end already? And I know so many people really enjoyed this, and I mean, it's not a bad book at all. It's just like, it's a solid thriller, I would say, but it's also nothing too special in my opinion. Another 3-star read, 3.5 stars, 3 stars, was The Husband's Secret by Liane Moriarty. This is my third Liane Moriarty book, and so far my least favorite. Like most Liane Moriarty books, we follow multiple perspectives. There's, I think, 3 perspectives in this one, and one is about a woman who discovers a letter from her husband that is just hidden in some boxes in her house, and on the like outside he wrote like only to be opened in the event of my death. And so obviously she gets really curious and like desperately wants to know what's in the letter. And then in another perspective, we follow a woman that lives with her husband and her cousin, and the two just sit her down and are like, well, we're lovers now, so this is happening. So that's weird. And then she decides to move back to her house, to her hometown with her son. And then we also follow a woman who is an older woman whose daughter was killed, murdered, like several years ago, I think decades ago, and who's still grieving over the loss. And they all end up in like the same, is there a 4th perspective? They all like are in the same town, and like their lives intertwine and stuff is unraveled and things like that. Anyway, basically, this is the typical Liane Moriarty book in the way that it is written, in the way that it is structured. I think that it's very her style, and I quite enjoyed that. It did take me a little bit to get into the book somehow. At first I was like, who are these people? Like, I don't really care. And then because of the different perspectives, it was just a little bit abrupt sometimes, the changes, the jumps between them. And then at the end, this like mystery that's unveiled is also not that spectacular, and like this like, oh that's it, like, okay. It just was a little bit predictable, a little underwhelming, but still a solid book, I would say. And I saved the best for last, because pretty much one of the best books that I read this month is another 5-star read, and that is Pines by Blake Crouch. And this book is one of my new favorites because it was so fantastic. I won't tell you overly much about the plot because you really shouldn't know too much, but it's about this FBI agent called Ethan, and he is tasked with traveling to this small town called Wayward Pines, where some other FBI agents have recently disappeared while on a mission. So he tries to get there, and he just wakes up there and has at first no memories of who he is. He doesn't have an ID, any like personal belongings with him, and he just wakes up by the river in the town, and then he goes into the town and talks to the townspeople, and he starts noticing like some weird things about them, like how they're behaving, what they're saying, how they're acting, and how no one really seems to want to help him, and eventually he realizes that he might not ever be able to leave the town again. Holy shit. This book is so fantastic. It is so well written. The suspense was killing me throughout the book, I swear. If you haven't read the TV show yet, I really read the TV show. If you haven't watched the TV show yet, I really recommend to read the book first. I feel like, I don't know if the same thing, I haven't seen the show, but like I feel like the same feeling cannot possibly be recreated by a TV show. It's impossible. Because it's just like, you're reading and reading, you're like feeling so desperate for him, like just leave, just get out, like why don't you just get out? And it's just like, oh please, somebody helping, why is no one helping him? Like where, oh, the feelings, they're just like, oh my god. I have not yet read the sequels, but I'm literally like dying to get to them. I'll hopefully do that as soon as I can. And so there is a really big twist at the end that I did not see coming in that sense, and I initially wasn't sure that I would like it. I was like, oh, this is what they decided to do, but then it grew on me, and I thought that it was like the best way to take the best direction to take the story in anyway. So this is just a magnificent novel, and I really hope that the sequels live up to it, and you should absolutely read it. If you haven't read it and you haven't seen the show, jump on it. Also, I bought these books on Amazon, all three, and they were so cheap. They were like €4.30 for one. So I recommend checking your Amazon and seeing if they're also as cheap. I don't know. But these are just so, this book is just so good. Like literally, you have to read it. Alright. And that is it, finally. Oh my god, I'm hoarse. My voice is dying, but I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And I'm sorry that it was so delayed. Pretty much probably the last person on YouTube to now upload their wrap up, but I really wanted to hit that Friday. I did say that I might not upload on Friday this week, but I really wanted to, so I wanted to film this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know you might not remember how your reading was in November, but how is your reading going in December? Let me know. I am not reading much at all. I have a final tomorrow, and then I have holidays finally, but I have not been reading much at all. I have not finished a single book yet in December, so yeah. Anyway, I will see you soon with another video. Have a lovely week. Bye!